Hello, welcome. I'm really excited about today's session, how healthcare should be thinking like a cyber adversary. And a couple of the sessions that we had yesterday really kind of build on this discussion today. Very fortunate that we have the experts with us to talk about those services and talk about how we should be thinking like the bad guys. And before we get started, wanted to just remind a few of you folks, and for those of you who might just be first joining us, we have a panel on the right-hand side of the screen. That's where you'll be able to go ahead now and take a look at the poll questions we have. Those will be important for today's discussion. We can also, you'll see a Q&A tab. That's where you'll want to ask any questions to our presenters. And then at the end of the session, if you could kindly take the poll for our survey so we can get your thoughts about today's session. So with that, very excited that I get to introduce my colleagues. Some of them are ethical hackers and carry titles like social engineer experts, but they're going to share their thoughts and experience with you today. So I'm going to introduce Morgan, Andrew, and Keith. Take it away.
Thank you. So my name is Morgan Habecker. I am the manager for the Red Team here at Synergistic. My experience includes about 12 years of military service, another 12 years of cybersecurity experience in penetration testing, securing networks, all various kinds, doing a lot of network admin, system administration, and so on. I have a lot of certs. I think some of them have expired at this point because it's just been a long time. My passions include the human element. I tend to gravitate towards physical penetration testing and social engineering. So I like to own the humans. And with that, we will go to Andrew.
Alrighty, so Andrew Bindner, I'm a senior security consultant here at Synergistic. I've been in the field for well over 20 years. Note the gray hair. But I started out my career in the United States Navy as a cryptographer, working in wireless security, and then moving into network defense support. I have worked, once I got off of active duty, working in the civilian community, I have supported industries in darn near everything under the sun. My favorite thing is I void warranties for a living, and that is because my passion really is IoT. IoT is not just the hardware and device that you plug into your network. It is compromised of everything under the sun, internal, external, web, wireless, mobile. And I love all things. So let's see, beyond that, I have spoken at RSA, Cybersecurity Summit Brazil, a few others, and I'm co-author of Hacking with Cali. Keith?
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Keith Cox, and I bend computers to my will and tell okay stories. So I'm actually 5 years into the cybersecurity world via vulnerability management as well as penetration testing. And again, just like everybody else, I have a slew of certs that I don't wish to go down the line and bore you with. Interesting fact, though, is my path to this career is very unconventional. I was actually went to college as an actor, film, writing, all that stuff, and somehow ended up into computers, which is a weird marriage because my passion is also shared with social engineering, and within that realm, I get to employ some of those techniques as an actor as I learn into this field of social engineering. So I get to pretend and I get to lie, but all for the betterment of network and security and good practices all around. So with that, I enjoy my job and my career path. This has been like nothing else, and I hope to bring as much information and use to whoever finds this interesting.
Right. So before we begin, there's a few things that we definitely wanted to clear up and get out of the way. We are all aware that in our daily security practices, there are things that we use to combat malicious behavior. whether that's from an entity outside of our organization or inside of our organization. But the intent of this talk is actually to don the mantle of the malicious actor and then think through what they would do and how they perceive what or how to bypass our defenses, right? So in the case of our vulnerability management programs, we often think of vulnerability assessments. The vulnerability assessments being really nothing than scanning our network. There's some really great tools out there like Nexpose and Qualys and Nessus, but they can scan from an authenticated point of view or an unauthenticated point of view, and pretty much they're all designed to grab that low-hanging fruit. Default passwords, any missing security patches, just kind of a general house cleaning. But what separates that is those are machine-based versus human-based elements. So when we move in from vulnerability assessments to penetration testing, what we're actually doing is we're exploiting those risks, not just identifying them. So let's say, for instance, a vulnerability scan can identify a default password on a web application. Penetration test is going to say, okay, well, there's that default password that we can get in there. How can we take that, escalate our privileges, move laterally through the system? What type of data is there, and how does that risk really impact your system? Red team and blue team, I'm going to leave that to Morgan. Morgan, you had a really great way of explaining the difference between red team and blue team, for our internal usage. When you were talking about an interaction you had with a client just last week, would you mind taking on those?
Sure. So when we're talking red team and blue team, we really have to think about this as a holistic perspective, right? If we have so the terms red team and blue team come from the military. Back in when we would do operations against ourselves, right, in order to train for combat, for war, we would have a red team or the opposition force. The opposition force would come and start trying to attack the defenders being the blue team. So that kind of carried over into the cybersecurity realm. Because hackers tend to think of things in terms of combat, right? So when we think of a red team, it's not just one attack or this other attack. It's not a penetration test. It's not a vulnerability scan. It's a holistic approach, a holistic view of your defense. So if you are trying to defend your network against this kind of threat, you would have a red team to assess not just how you patched your systems, but how you can defend your systems. So if, for example, I'm an attacker, I want to come after you in a healthcare perspective, I can run through these different attack scenarios, and I want to see how you're going to detect me, because red teaming is very quiet. It's designed to be as silent as possible, as realistic as possible. Typically, these breaches, they go on for years before they're discovered. So in a red team perspective, we can say you were not able to detect us in a reasonable amount of time, right? So we're going to go in, we're not going to run scanning tools, we're not going to run any of that stuff. We're going to go in as silently as possible and see if your monitoring can detect our presence. Once you detect us, what can you do about it? Can you kick us out of the network? And once you do kick us out of the network, if you can you keep us out? And that's the blue team, right? The blue team is responsible for trying to keep us out. And you can think of this, if we have sports fans, a football team, right? If you're going to go play some backyard football, you got to split the team in half. So half the guys go on the red team, half the guys go on the blue team, and this is how you're going to play your game. And this is how we, as red teamers, this is how we operate. Andrew?
Right. So, I was actually going to talk about social engineering, but Keith, this is our passionate expert when it comes to social engineering. And I'm going to leave it to you. Yeah, you do that. You go right ahead. But I'm going to leave that to you. Go ahead and take over the social engineering and how that how that really plays a part and role in our organizational security.
Absolutely. And again, you're too kind and maybe even a little too aggressive with those words that you're using to describe me, but I appreciate it. As you guys may have noticed, most of the conversation thus far has been about systems being exploited or vulnerabilities within systems and controls of machines and whatnot. Social engineering touches on the human element of hacking or penetration testing. And quite frankly, the human element is probably the most vulnerable element of the whole package of hacking, because there's no software update, there's no firmware, there's nothing that really kind of keeps things in check except for maybe training. But social engineering, has a wide variety of facets to it. So most of you all may be familiar with phishing, which is emails being sent to targeted individuals for them to interact with, to either download, click a link, submit, which is redirected to some page that collects credentials or whatever the pretext demands. Then you also have newer attack chains like smishing, which is SMS messaging through cell phones, where you might get a malicious link, people telling you that, you've missed a payment, click this link to, log into your account, something of similar, very similar to phishing, but just in terms of the cell phone. And then you also have phone calls, which goes by the term vishing, where you have somebody call, which I'm sure everybody has probably receiving calls today of somebody trying to get you to fill out something that your car payments are overdue, or, social security payments, or something in regards to something that somebody's trying to get out of you. And then you also,
my favorite one, Keith, my favorite one happens to be when they call and tell me that I have a virus on my computer and they're calling from Microsoft. I love those.
Classic one.
Actually, so, there's a lot that really goes into that whole social engineering aspect. And even just, I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago, you had a really great experience when it came to, well, I shouldn't say great for the organization, but you as the malicious actor in this case, were able to really use and leverage open source intelligence to set up that social engineering. Do you want to talk about that real quick?
Absolutely. And every hacker is only as good as the information that they're able to collect against their target. So OSINT, open source intelligence gathering, in the discovery phase is very, 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 very important, and really determines how successful you're going to be at the end of your assessment. So in the case of my situation, I've been testing a lot of medical companies or hospitals, and what I've noticed is they've overshare a lot of information from their main websites. So information that I was able to gather quickly within 5 minutes of me starting, password policies, what the default password is for new employees, what the naming convention may be for usernames and emails, where to log in, where to access, who to call for certain, such and such type of scenario. So with all this wealth of information that I have, I'm already way ahead of the game, because I'm able to then go to public sources like LinkedIn, and everybody loves to update and brag about their position and what job that they have. So it's another wealth and resources that I can pull for people who work for a particular company, and I'm able to pull all that information, format the names of these employees into the email formats that I found from these websites, and then conduct password spraying against open entities like Outlook web application, which has flaws in itself. So being able to spray passwords and guess correctly, I'm able to bypass and get to the next level, which at this point was bypassing two-factor, which is also kind of a social engineering game that I'm playing. I'm having to brute force request, two-factor request, and within numbers, and I call it luck. People may say others, but I was lucky enough to have somebody accept my request of just completely bombarding them with, hey, let me in, let me in, let me in, let me in, until somebody let me in. And ultimately I'm able to get past that and then get to the keys to the kingdom, obtaining W-2s, pay stubs, or other, PII, social security numbers, date of birth, things of that nature. And all this from, the starting point of how much information I was able to gather going into the thing. So very important and very fun assessment, especially when things work in my favor.
So, when you were doing that, assessment, you're trying to bypass two-factor authentication. You sent out emails in the first place, your phishing exercises, and to those of us who work in security, it seems pretty obvious. Like, these come through on a really irregular basis, and we tell our users, what are we, please don't click on these. If you see something, call it out, ask IT, ask a colleague, hey, what are you experiencing? But why are we doing this? What does this have to do with a malicious actor? Why is this so effective? Morgan, in your experience, as long as you've been in the field and as much social engineering as you've done, why does this work? And then how do we take that and move it from there to attacking external services on a network?
So when we're talking about, thinking like a cyber adversary, it's all about the people, right? Almost every single pen test I've ever done, be it in an internal pen test, external pen test, social engineering, physical, they all in some way will eventually revolve around the users, right? So users are a network's weakest link, and passwords being, the king of all things, you get onto an internal network and you will first try to get credentials, because that's going to be your path in. That's going to be the easiest way for you to get access to something else that user has some level of access to, and then we can escalate privileges and go on to those routes. So one of the things I love when it comes to the people element is pen testers, hackers, they profile people, right? And I did this assessment a few years ago at a financial institution, where I was able to walk into the building, into the back room, the actual legal office of the bank, by holding an empty box. I held it. I was struggling just a little bit. So, oh, hey, could you open the door for me? And they opened the door right up. I was wearing a hoodie and jeans. I didn't look like an employee. I obviously didn't have a badge on. They let me walk right in, and I said, oh, cool, thank you. And I set the box down in the little conference room in there, and I started walking around. And what I was looking for was somebody who I would expect to be less technically inclined, who might believe that I worked for IT. And I walked around there for a little while, and I found this older lady, and I said, hey, excuse me, would you mind plugging in my USB drive? I'm with IT. I assure you this is perfectly safe. You can trust me. And she goes, oh, I don't think I can do that. Here, let me ask my manager. And I'm thinking, oh no, I'm caught at this point. So she takes me over to her manager, and it's a much younger woman. And I'm thinking, oh no, she's probably a little bit more technically inclined. She at least knows Instagram and Twitter, right? So the older lady asked her, hey, this gentleman's with IT, and he wants me to plug this in. And the manager said, oh yeah, sure, no worries, go ahead. And it blew me away, because the younger, potentially more technically inclined person was the one who allowed me access. But the interesting part was, my profile didn't exactly work, but I still got the access I needed. So it may not always pan out in the way that we expect it to, but there's always going to be somebody who's going to give us the access that we need. So the moral of the story, when we're talking about, how to think like the hacker, how to think like the cyber adversary, right? We're talking about not just the people, right? We want to have a good patching policy. We want to have a good technical controls for securing things, but we really have to focus on the people, because the people are where it's going to matter the most. Almost, well, I wouldn't say almost all, but many of the breaches that happen today are because of some level of social engineering, be it a phishing attack, vishing, or some other, usually some sort of human element style of attack.
So Morgan and Keith, both of you, some of our listeners right now may just they have the idea that this may just be, well, you got lucky. How do you feel that luck plays a portion into what you're doing, especially when you're combating the human element from the malicious actors mindset?
So I don't think that luck has a huge role to play, because there are of course technical controls, like Keith said. All he had to do was ask the right person to let him in, and she was happy to get that two-factor authentication notice and hit accept or approve, and it let him walk right in the door. But most organizations have hundreds or thousands of employees. I guarantee somebody's going to hit that button, right? And if we do it enough times, we can always find somebody. So I don't think it's so much about luck as it is statistics.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I can agree with that. It's a mixture. So sometimes there's engagements where things don't happen, but oftentimes if you're prepared going into the assessment and you've kind of covered all your bases as much as you can, your pretext is as developed as it possibly could, especially like, let's say, something in regards to COVID-19. It's a very hot topic nowadays. You have something very convincing around a pretext about that. Oftentimes people are going to bite, especially if you put a sense of urgency on it. And a topic like COVID-19, it has that urgency already applied to it. So with the level of preparedness, and like Morgan said, numbers, it does come down to a statistics thing. Somebody's going to pick up the hook and
right.
Give us
Absolutely.
that act.
So Keith, if we were to take the external piece off the board, or not, sorry, if we were to take the phishing, the social engineering off the board, what are we looking at from a malicious actor standpoint when it comes to the external network? How are we perceiving? How can we get in? What are we thinking? Really looking for as the bad guy?
Yeah, so we're looking for any misconfiguration, unpatched server, or an old application that has a known flaw. And I've mentioned Outlook web application. It's commonly used. It's an on-prem version of Outlook instead of using the 0365 version, but it has a known enumeration flaw. So any type of user enumeration that can be done is like, it's a donut, a blessing, just a sweet treat for a malicious actor to find. Because it helps you have more targeted attacks instead of you kind of shooting in the wild. So like, again, just within these last couple of assessments, I've run across these, and every time I've had my list of people from OSINT conducted, and I've been able to successfully do password sprays using weak passwords and been able to get from external to internal, because once I have passwords, now I know how to log into whatever external facing thing that they have. So after I have those credentials, I'm looking for VPNs to get access to, or whatever their single sign-on option is that has their intranet or any type of internal information. But it's always looking for the easiest low-hanging fruit. So SMTP servers, can I do any type of open relay attack? Send emails from within, so it's from a trusted source, or default passwords. Again, misconfigurations of that sort. Anything and everything that we can get our teeth on, we're going to try to take advantage of it. And the easier, the better. We're not looking for complicated exploits.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can see you're holding back from talking about your experience going into the internal network, and I know that Morgan is chomping at the bit to say something about physical security, because that's his passion, right? But before we get to those, let's talk a little bit about the wireless network security and the internal network security. So when we talk about wireless security, ultimately we're really honed and focused on 802.11 networks, what you would consider your normal WLAN networks, your guest network, corporate wireless network. Maybe IT has a backbone. Perhaps you've segregated your IoT devices, at least I really hope that you have, to its own wireless network, so it communicates in its own little VLAN. But those attacks and getting into the network are no different than other external attacks. The only difference is that it's proximity, and we end up spending time having to sit and guess keys. Morgan, when we talk about physical security in just a minute, we can talk about those devices that someone may use to intercept those the wireless piece. But when we get internal access, I love internal access because it's a playground. We often in the security community describe internal networks as, or just networks in general, right, as there's a hard outer shell, but a nice candy, gummy, gooey inside of the network. And a lot of companies, when they go and pen test, they immediately try to push towards getting domain administrator access or enterprise or schema level access, because they can logically say that they've, oh, well, given enough time, we've got keys to the kingdom and we can get to everything. But that doesn't really focus too well on the risk that's there. For instance, even this week, I am currently on an internal penetration test. And I tried to get to domain admin so I could try to move credentials around so I could see what's in Active Directory and things like that. And I haven't gotten there yet, but I was still able to find things like open file shares. I was able to enumerate over 50,000 social security numbers and things like that. And that, from a malicious actor standpoint, is really what I'm after. I don't care if I can bypass every little single thing in your network. I care about getting to the data that I can take off your network and go sell it somewhere else so I can get paid. So internally, we're looking at things of weaker permission sets or no permission sets at all, default credentials, missing security patches, things that give us that easy win where we may not have to do a whole lot to possibly trigger those vulnerabilities. I mean, that's the whole key of a red team, right? Come in and try to be undetected as much as possible versus pen test that is very loud and obnoxious and sets off all the alarms. I mean, there's good pluses and minuses on both sides. But let's talk about physical security for a half second. Morgan, dude, this is, as long as I have known you, which is longer than probably either one of us cares to admit, we're like brothers at this point, is, your aptitude for physical break-in and those devices that are centered around that are really just, I've never really seen anybody with a higher level passion for it. Do you want to describe a little bit about the physical security side of breaking in and what that means from a malicious actor's point of view?
Absolutely. So physical security is really interesting because there are no two locations or no two organizations that are alike. A few years ago, I did an attack against this. It was a healthcare organization. They had multiple locations. And what was fascinating was each one actually had very different operations. So in one location, they had a contracted physical security force. They had tasers, they had fun stuff, and they walked around. And I was able to look at Google Maps and find an image of one of the security guards walking around, and their badge was clearly visible. And I was able to actually clone the badge from that, at least make a replica. And then I just had to stand by their parking garage to actually collect legitimate badges, and I could walk right in the door. It took less than, I don't know, maybe 8 hours to access the facility with very little effort. We talk about physical security as it's this this just wide open thing, and that's not always true. I create a lot of devices. It's kind of one of my passions, like Andrew was talking about, to create these devices that will give me some level of access. So I created a device that is based on just a Raspberry Pi, and you plug it in the network, and it automatically does a lot of bypassing for VLANs and things like that, or makes those attempts if they exist. And it tries to get access to the internet, and then it gives me a remote shell so I can get back in there from anywhere in the world. What's interesting is I made it modular so I could add a camera. And one of the fun things I did with it was we were attacking a casino a few years ago. And I put it in a conference room. It's a very cheap webcam on a Raspberry Pi board. I didn't even have a case on the board. And I put it in the center of the table in this conference room. and I clipped the webcam to a glass jar that was nearby, and everybody ignored it. And I was able to sit back and watch the presentation with the CEO in the room, and nobody caught it. They just thought, oh, well, somebody's got a camera in here, no big deal. So it was really interesting because it showed that it didn't matter what we did, we were not going to get challenged. I mean, you were actually part of that assessment with me, Andrew, when we were doing the actual casinos, walking around trying to bypass things. We learned a lot from that particular assessment about the casino industry. But it turns out we're almost never going to get challenged when we physically walk on site. So our awareness training programs really have to get beefed up, because if people aren't challenging it for healthcare, for medical industries, I know people who, we're not allowed to go dumpster diving legally anymore, but if I stick my hand in there and I just start snapping pictures, right, I can probably grab some information, maybe somebody accidentally tossed some healthcare records out, and they maybe somehow ended up in the trash. All we got to do is take our cell phone, put it in there, and people will walk by and they just look at you like you're a crazy person, and they just keep on going. That's about the extent of the challenge that we typically see on these kinds of assessments.
Yeah, absolutely. And then when we talk about command and control, those devices can really make a really big difference. Just a lot of times we'll go in and we'll just cook something into the network, or we'll pop underneath someone's desk and we'll plug them in, and they call home and they give us remote access into your environment. In those particular cases, you don't manage that device. You don't have any security against that device. There are some things that you can do, but at the same time, the command and control feature really allows us to just sit there and pretty much play on the network, and go after, we can spend more time being methodical about being more precise about what we do, rather than just coming in with a scanner on a regular basis. So Morgan, really interesting. I'm looking at the polls as they're coming in. 26% said that their user awareness training is in the somewhat effective, but oddly enough, no one said that their user awareness training is rock solid. So the points that you really hit on there are, that the fact that we can walk. We do walk very often just right in through the front door and say, yes, we're here for this, we're here for that. And we can, we can just go about our business. Do you want to go ahead and we'll move on to the next topic?
Well, I want to touch on that for just a second.
Oh, go for it.
I really think the awareness training is really important to pay attention to, and it's not just. Honestly, having a good awareness training program is probably one of the best investments that an organization can make. But you have to be careful on which one you're looking at, because if you have one where users are bored, they're required to take it, they don't want to take it because it's time out of their day, and it's one of those where they just go online, they click next, they're listening to, MC Hammer or whatever they want to listen to on Spotify. They're just clicking next. They're not paying attention to that program, right? So we have to really rethink how we're providing those services. So can you get somebody to physically come on site? Can you get somebody to actually engage with your users and show that, maybe show off some of the tools that we use for physical attacks, some social engineering examples, things like that, and really engage with the users so that they can understand why this stuff is really important, why passwords are important. Talk about entropy with them so they understand that making a long password makes a huge difference. It's not just dictionary words and things like that, but making a really long password will get significantly harder to crack. So it's all those little things you have to really pay attention to, and I think it's really important to choose a good program. Off my soapbox. Go ahead. All right, so
is the slide deck advancing? Is it just me?
Yeah, I moved it up. next topic.
Okay. Why don't you go ahead and carry on, because it looks like I'm having some technical difficulties.
No worries. So when we talk about security as an overall holistic thing, we need to start thinking about it in terms of a machine, right? These vulnerability assessments are really important. They're really good to take care of some of the low-hanging fruit and some of the systematic issues you might have across your network, patching, things like that. That's your core security, vulnerability management, but you need to look at gap analysis. You have to do monitoring. You have to look at all these things, pen testing, red teaming, all of that is really part of this whole. And if you miss one, the rest don't matter, right? You could have the amazing security. You could have two-factor authentication put in place. You could do password auditing. Doesn't really matter because Keith just has to send the request to the right person, and now they've allowed you in. So now you have awareness training that comes into play, and you have all these other things that really dig in. So the attacker isn't looking for anything crazy. They're not trying to show off how great they are at some random exploit. They're just looking for an easy way in. And a lot of the times when we do our OSINT, like Keith was saying earlier, we find passwords from breaches in various other organizations. So when Adobe was breached, right, we have those dumps. I've got like 6 terabytes of these dumps. And all we have to do is run a quick search and we get a list of all the potential passwords. We try those. We try iterations of those because people tend to be lazy, right? And they'll reuse the same base words. They may just iterate that number at the end. Most passwords tend to be, first letter is a capital. There's some randomness in there, mostly all lowercase, and then they put a few numbers at the end. And that's typically what we see. So if all we have to do is iterate that number a few times, we may eventually come across the appropriate password. So that's just stuff that we find online. So you have to look at your attack surface, right? You have to have good policies in place. You have to have two-factor authentication. There's a whole lot of this stuff. So when we start thinking like this cyber adversary, we need to start thinking of security as a whole in terms of like this big machine, right? These cogs, each one of these issues is a cog. Andrew, I think you're on mute, buddy.
You're right. I was on mute. Very good. Right. So just a quick question I wanted to interrupt with, and that is, how often have you guys either seen or completed a password audit? Now, I know that when I go on site for an internal penetration test, if I get to domain administrator, I do, and a lot of companies do, they'll pull down the NTDS DIP file out of Active Directory, they'll take it offline, and they'll start going through, but it's usually just a very short period. It wouldn't really qualify as an audit. How often in either of y'all's careers have you seen an actual password audit, or that's where the focus of the testing is?
It doesn't happen as often as I would like. Passwords, like we've kind of harped on a little bit, probably a little bit too much in this discussion. They are the king, right? And I've seen maybe a few dozen in my 12 years of doing this. Very rarely do organizations outsource their security. However, the NIST, the new NIST standard, went from, I think it was 12 characters, and then back in March, they went down to 8 characters as a minimum password policy. But so it, on the surface, it would seem like they're trying to make things worse, right? But when you read through the NIST documentation, they're saying add multi-factor authentication and perform regular password auditing. This is going to be really important as we go forward, because now all these government organizations and organizations that follow NIST need to start performing that. And I really think that's going to be a big factor going forward, because passwords are going to start becoming less of a attack vector.
Right.
The more these organizations.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. Keith, I wanted to give you a chance to jump in and weigh in on this question as well. Because we have, in our polls, I'm seeing the last time someone actually did a password audit was only about 11% within the last 6 months, and then only about 5% within even the last year. How much have you had, how many times have you really done a password audit? How regularly do you see it come across? But maybe also from when you're doing an internal, I know that you also pull down NTDS DIT and go through and perform a lightweight password audit. How old are some of those passwords that you see in there on a pretty regular basis?
Yeah. So like you said, I do my little auditing myself, and a lot of the times, the passwords are sad, to say the least, in terms of the type of things people are using. So we will look for historical. We won't look for current passwords. We'll also look at the historical records of passwords kept. And a lot of the times it's very weak dictionary words like "I love you," and then maybe a number appended to it. And then people will increment from there. Or something like season and year with, incrementations of, the year or the change of the season, depending on what's going on. And even just in my experience right now, summer 2020 is a real popular summer right now. Everybody's really enjoying it, it seems, because that's been a lot of my entryways to a lot of these applications. But yeah, in terms of actual companies requesting password audits, yeah, that's kind of a rarity, and it's kind of something that we would, in my past experience, would offer that just so they had some type of awareness, but not to the level that needs to be happening. So, yeah.
And I will step in real quick, just so everyone is aware of what a password audit is. When we talk about these password audits, we're talking about actually taking the, as Andrew said, the ntds.dit, which is the full database of your domain passwords and groups and all that. And we take them and we put them through a password cracker. We'll look at, like Keith was talking about, the actual history. So if you have your domain controller set to remember, I think the default was like 7. So the last 7 passwords. And if somebody's been there long enough, we'll have all 7 of those previous passwords, including the current one. So we will try to crack them all. And then we look at things like base words. If you're somewhere up in the Northeast, chances are you're going to have like a Pats fan, right? So they're going to, you'll see a lot of base words that are like Patriots this, Pats this. Organization names are a big one. Street addresses are another big one, things like that. So we look at the base words. We'll look at how many people had passwords that are more than 8 characters or less than 12. And just there's a lot of analysis that goes in, and it really shows you kind of where everybody's at. So in an organization where they have the minimum set to 8, chances are very good that most of your users are going to be from 8 to 10 characters. So they will do the bare minimum to be able to pass those password requirements. And then we,
Hey, Morgan, I'm sorry, but I have to interrupt you. We are having I'm being told we have some technical difficulties with the slide deck. I understand you're the one who's presenting. If you would please stop presenting so I can take over slides so our attendees can follow along. Okay, sure. I apologize for the interruption. There we are. Okay, so we have beat up on passwords quite a bit, but let's. One of the things we do need to take into consideration is that when we look at the progressive steps towards vulnerability scanning, penetration testing, where do these all fit and align into how we advance our security? Keith, how do you feel that penetration, how do you feel a customer can go from vulnerability scanning to penetration testing? And then Morgan, how can somebody move from penetration testing into red teaming? Because those are quite significant steps, and we're talking about the leaps and bounds of an organizational security posture. And I will give everyone a reminder, we've got just a few minutes before we open up Q&A.
Yeah, so I'll try to run through this real quickly. So vulnerability management, like we've all discussed, it's the automated process of making sure that your low hanging fruit is taken care of. So make sure your patching is good. Unwanted machines are offline, and just a complete awareness of what your presence is within your organization in terms of how your machines and hosts and servers are running. So in order to transition from that, I would say, make sure that you're constantly up to date with your patching, and to a point where you're comfortable to see how well a cyber adversary will try to, leverage against your current setting. So once you transition over, having a penetration test done on your network kind of puts to practice everything that you guys have been preparing for. But it will also give you better guidance, because there's little subtle misconfigurations that are taken advantage of, in terms of just like legacy processes, or like Andrew had mentioned, shares not properly secured, or passwords again just not being up to protect things, and stuff of that nature. Just so the challenge would just be to just be ready to see things that you thought on
now,
the
that
vulnerability
is probably key, Keith. Be ready, right? So we use penetration testing as a form of getting ready for Morgan, the advanced attacks, and red teaming. How do those differ from the malicious
when we're talking about when we're talking about looking at things from a malicious actor's point of view, goal orientation is probably what you're going to hear most. And if they're specifically targeting your organization, because you have to remember that they're opportunistic. So if you just happen to have an open vulnerability on the internet, chances are good you're going to get scanned and you're going to get compromised just based on pure opportunity. Like, it's there, it's open, they're going to take advantage, and that's about it. And they'll dig into it once they realize that they have that foothold. But then you look at the ones who are specifically targeting an organization, and it's goal orientation, right? So now we look at, does your organization handle specific medical records of somebody they may be targeting in particular? They may not be targeting your organization, but somebody that they are after, maybe a political party or something else, right? So they're going to target you and try to dig in, find those the low-hanging fruit, or find anything they can get a hold of. So when we look at the goal orientation, right, we do these advanced pen tests where they say, hey, this database is what we're really concerned about. This database right here is the one that we have to protect. So we go in, no holds barred, and our goal is to get access to that database. We don't care about domain admin. We don't care about any of this other stuff, because if we get anything, it's gravy. But now we're really focused on finding some level of access to that database, or whatever the goal might be. And that goes into red teaming, because red teaming is, again, that holistic approach, that holistic view of your overall organization and how it would handle that advanced persistent threat. So we would try to, no matter what it is, you don't know when we're going to come. We may have a very large window. We go in there and we may try physical attacks. We may try internal attacks, external attacks, or we may actually plan scenarios to test very specific parts of your organization's blue team.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Getting there is a little bit trickier. You have to go through a lot more in order to be ready for that style of assessment. There's a lot that goes into it. There's CISO work that goes into it, policies, and you have to look at this slide here, the cogs in the machine, and address pretty much every aspect that you can think of. Really put yourself in the attacker's shoes and think, hey, if I were the attacker, how would I try to get in here? Right. You have to try to take yourself out of the situation and say, well, what would be an attacker's goals or targets in our organization. How can we best protect that?
Right. Actually, that's exactly the point of this talk. Keith, just quickly, what are some ways that we can improve in protecting ourselves from OS int?
Yeah, so be aware of the information that you are presenting to the world, and try to figure out how to say more with less. Do you need to have your password policy exposed to the public? Do you need to have people taking pictures of their badges and showing the world what the orientation of a security badge looks like? Your policy and emails and usernames and where to access certain things. Do these things need to be available to the public, or can you pull some of that back and hide that only and be accessible through internal resources instead? And then go ahead, Aaron.
Oh, it's okay. I was agreeing with you, but I'll move on. And that was hardening, and I'll take that one. So in the case of hardening, locking down those systems, even in the case of like web applications, right? Because as we look from OSINT, we look like databases like Shodan. There's so many others, but that's just one of the most widely recognized, where it goes out and actually scans the internet and it catalogs all the data and makes it easy for attackers to reference that information. Even something as simple as removing the headers that identify the server version or platform version of your web responses helps minimize and a malicious actor going, oh, look, there's IIS 7.0. I can attack that because I know public exploits that are available for this and that, or I have tricks up my sleeve to do this and that. Especially from your internal should actually be locked down way more than what is really common, but there's always that balance versus usability and security. So it's something you constantly have to work at and play with in the case of hardening, but following CIS benchmarks, NIST recommendations, things like that to lock down and put benchmarks upon your individual servers, web applications, services, etc. Those are always real key. And then monitoring. If you're just dumping your logs somewhere into a database and no one's really paying attention to it, then sure, you've met the requirement for monitoring, but you're not actually monitoring. Making sure that someone is there and actually doing those things. Morgan, security testing really is your focus, obviously being the manager of the red team here, but how would you say that, we are really quick and on time. So how can we help improve security through security testing and user awareness training?
Yeah, so I'd say security testing is the easiest one, right? Because you're going to have another organization go out and perform your testing. But taking it seriously, finding the right organization with the right set of skills to go in and accurately test your network. We've seen some organizations reports where they say, hey, we got this report from so-and-so, could you validate it? And we go in there like, well, it's cool, but we found so much more, right? They missed a lot. And it's not just because their skill level or anything like that. It's because we only have a certain window of time to test. So feel free to get testing from various organizations, but find the ones that you can trust. They've provided good resources previously. Make sure that you take those seriously. Even the low-level findings, the low criticality findings, take them all seriously and start making sure you go through those and patching them up.
Absolutely. So we are going to wrap up things here so we can leave, unfortunately, a shorter amount of time for Q&A, but some things we want to talk about is when you take away what we've talked about here is that a key to a good defense is often the phrase is having a good offense. Unless you're in a position where you can, one, be legal about what you're doing and reverse counterattacking, and that you're, adequately trained to take on another entity somewhere else, the key to a good defense is actually still a good defense. There's no offense really in here other than training, whether it's through user awareness or technical physical training of your admins, through red teaming, through advanced pen tests, things like that, to keep their skills high to make sure that they're there. But then ultimately, you're resulting in a better defense posture overall. we find that we often speak about a balance of security versus usability. And that also needs to be looked at individual groups within the organization as well. So the organization administrators, you have a lot of power. If you're listening to this, please, you have a lot of power. Make sure that you're not making it impossible to do your job, but even making it a little bit more difficult than, say, the user down in finance who doesn't really understand computers. There's a difference between the usability and security at the various levels throughout the organization. Evaluate your technical risks often. Remember, human element is exploitable. In the case of humans, we've all been in this. Morgan, Keith, we've been in this for a very long time. Even we are susceptible. We still have to question things. We still have to make sure we're following policies. We like to think that we don't have a big fat head and saying, oh, I can spot everything, because sometimes it's really not that easy. And then threat model security in your layers. So we talked about the different layers and how to approach security, what a malicious actor thinks, but from an organization point, if you look and say, what if scenario plays out best? If someone breaks through here, I think a malicious actor is going to try for X, Y, and Z. Okay, what if someone gets through one of those defenses? What if someone gets through one of those further defenses? So we have that security through layers. And that's something that you really need to focus on. But make sure that somebody in your organization is putting on the devil's advocate hat, looking at it from a malicious actor standpoint, and then reapproaching security from the bad guy's point of view on the what if scenarios. We are short for time, so I'm just going to say thank you. April, do you want to take it open? I know we only have a few minutes. I apologize for the Q&A, or April or Lauren, I believe.
Yep. Can you hear me? This is Lauren.
Yes, we can.
Okay, yes. Thank you, Morgan, Andrew, Keith. Hello, everyone. This is Lauren. I'm subbing in for April, who is having some technical difficulties. I do believe we have time for just a few questions. We got a few from the attendees. The first is, what is the most common method of attack?
I'll take that one.
So I'll take that.
You want to take it? Oh, go for it. Go for it.
Go ahead, Andrew.
Oh, okay. All right. I'll take it then.
So,
so right now, because of everyone working at home, because of everyone involved, with the global pandemic, attacks centered around COVID-19 are really the big one right now, because everyone knows they need to pay attention, keep aware, keep alert. So we're seeing a lot more in case of social engineering, whether that's through phishing. We are seeing a lot more of those attacks. Externally, outdated systems or services, things that haven't been patched, vulnerable third parties. Internally, weak permission sets, not setting the proper security levels for data classification and gaining access into those things, and then missing security patches. Morgan, got anything beyond that? Oh, weak passwords, definitely weak passwords.
That pretty much covers it.
Yeah.
Okay, one more question, and Morgan can have this one. Password expiration is no longer recommended per NIST Special Publication 800-63 Digital Identity Guidelines. As an attacker, what's your take on this? Is it easier for an attacker to be able to more easily guess passwords like summer 2020 because of password expirations?
So that's one of the really fun parts of it. This is where the password audits really help out, because you have no more expiration. You have a smaller password requirement or length. But that's where the password audits come in really handy, because we can test for things like that. We can test and make sure that users are using better base words and better, longer passwords, because when we get there and we crack, I did an organization where I think it was like 4,000 users, and I cracked over 98% of all their passwords, because most of them were password or the company's name. That was really, really bad, right? So if you do those regular audits, if you look at length, making sure that you set length at a much longer space, like if you require 12 characters or more for password, then you'll inherently be much, much more secure.
Okay, and due to time, thank you everyone for attending this session. Note, if we didn't get to your question, we will do our best to reach out to you directly in the next couple of days with an answer. Stick around for our last session of the summit. Final thoughts, yours, mine, and ours, with Eric Decker and David Finn.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.